Welcome to Sluggo, college football talk at its best. From the center of the universe, also known as Kyle, Texas, it's Marty, seldom used reserve Coleman. And this week, not from New Jersey, but from Defusky Island, South Carolina, it's Casey, the Beef Cregan. And this is Sluggo, show number 4. Casey, no West Orange, New Jersey this week. What's happening, my friend?
I escaped the Northland to get back down to, I'll say my roots, even though technically my roots are New Jersey, but this is where I feel the most home. I am visiting my family who left me, abandoned me during this COVID. But then as they left, there's maybe a coincidence that when they left and came south, that's when the cases started to spike down here. But quite honestly, we're here on the island and it's golf cart only. We haven't seen a soul. I played golf today with my oldest stepson, and we were the only two people that were on this 9-hole course. There's 27 holes on this golf course. We played the back 9, and we were it. We didn't even see anybody. So we're being safe. It's fun. It's nice. It's hot. It's the South, man. It's awesome. Glad to be here.
So you're quarantining without actually trying to quarantine, really? Just quarantine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why my in-laws wanted me to come down so early in March, just because you don't see anybody. It is literally what I call rustic opulence, because it is just trees and beautiful homes spread out throughout the island. And you have to take a boat to get here. So they did make you take a mask, and they sprayed my forehead to make sure that I didn't have a fever and I'm good. But I think on the way back, I'm going to have to quarantine when I get back to New Jersey, because now it's vice versa. Before, states in the South weren't allowing folks from New Jersey, New York, Connecticut to come down here. Now it's vice versa. So I know you and Brandon talked about it a little bit the other day, and so I laughed when listening to it, but it is that way. It is the opposite.
We talked about your, quote, perfect timing on the trip between New Jersey and South Carolina. You know, I've spent some time right across the sound from you there on Hilton Head. And it's when Parker was younger, it was one of our favorite places in the world. Wasn't quite as quarantined as you were. There were obviously lots of people on Hilton Head, but it was still a slower pace of life. Real slow, walking around the island. Good times, man. It's been a few years since we've been there, but there are some beautiful sunsets on that. How do you say that? The Calibougue Sound?
Calibougue Sound, yeah.
Calibougue Sound, yeah. We spent some time there. It's a beautiful thing. Well, you mentioned it. I had a chance to talk to my good friend, Brandon Rink of TigerNet, Monday, and we talked about several issues. You know, of course, we talked about COVID-19. That's a requirement these days, as I like to say. But you and I are going to make an agreement. We limit that talk coming up, because I think people are starting to get their fill of it, unfortunately. But we also talked about the biggest challenges to Clemson going undefeated this year in the regular season and in the ACC. And we talked about some of the things you and I talked about last week, all the losses that Clemson suffered. And I asked Brandon which one he thought was the most important. So what I thought we'd do, a little bit different show this week, I thought we'd listen to that interview I had with Brandon on Monday, and then you and I would come back and talk about it and see what we thought about what Brandon had to say. And let's go from there. Sound good?
Sounds great. I'm sorry I ruined it that I already listened, but I'm going to listen to it again and we'll see what happens.
No problem. Second time, you may find out something you missed the first time.
Right.
Without further ado, here's my discussion on Monday with Brandon Rink of TigerNet. Joining me tonight is my friend, Brandon Rink from TigerNet. Now, Brandon and I go way back, probably 10 or 12 years or so. All those times, over those 12 years, we never got to meet each other until 2018 when Clemson was playing, visited Texas, played Texas A&M. I had big plans to take Brandon out for dinner at some, quote, real barbecue, at a real barbecue place. But lo and behold, Brandon and his family footed the bill for me that night. And I've always been grateful for what Brandon's done for Seldom Used Reserve, but I was never more grateful than that night with Black's Barbecue, Brandon. So tell your mom, Dad, I said thanks.
Absolutely. That sounds good right now. I'll get in the car, hop on out there.
Yeah, no, 1,300-mile drive. You'll make it in plenty of time. Hey, we met way back when we were both bloggers. Now, one of us parlayed that into a well-paying career, and the other one parlayed it into an expensive hobby. I'll let the guys out there figure out which one of us is which. But you're working for TigerNet. I'm not working at all for anything other than grins here on Seldom Used Reserve. But I appreciate your time tonight. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit. We know last week Clemson released some statistics or numbers on COVID rates for the team. Can you fill us in a little more and give us some information?
Yeah, so they announced, so this is the third round of kind of a news release that they have put out. And so far we have 47 confirmed cases among all Clemson athletes. And half of those are symptomatic and half are asymptomatic. So, there are no hospitalizations as of the Friday, June 26th school statement. So far, 37 of those 47 are football players. And I believe a couple more are some kind of football staff. We're not sure exactly which staff that is, but so 37 out of about 120 on your football roster have confirmed cases of coronavirus. So, that's, we'll have another announcement, I presume, later this week. They've been coming out on Fridays, it's kind of wrapping up this first month on campus, going into the next month when we're going into the first round of the preseason practice, which is supposed to start July 24th, at least by the NCAA mandate. So that's going on. Both the city and Clemson University have put mandatory mask ordinances in place. So that's another factor kind of coming around all the coronavirus cases. And then Pickens County, unfortunately, has been officially designated as a high-risk, high-spread county by the state's health organization. So it's a case where I live in Anderson County, and our cases were kind of up early on in the pandemic, but Pickens has been consistently double the amount of cases that Anderson County's had, and they have about 75,000 less people there. So it's kind of a hot zone right now. And even like Daniel High School and Pickens and Oconee schools have canceled their voluntary sports conditioning programs as of now. So it's a lot of not so great developments kind of going into trying to get football season going.
Wow, that is some great information there about in the county. But back to those staffers you mentioned, that you said you weren't sure what that meant besides the athletes. So that could be anybody from, let's say, grad assistants to assistant coaches to trainers, or anybody related to the program, correct?
Right. It was just kind of what we've heard is just staff, and then with voluntary workouts, the position coaches, the coaches aren't supposed to be working with players anyway, so I have no idea what kind of staff that would be.
Right. Okay. Well, you and I were chatting before we started recording, and we were talking about college football as a whole. And a lot of times I envy you in your job, but these days is not one of them. Not necessarily because there's not a lot of football to write about, but because there is the uncertainty, right? You never know from day to day, or perhaps hour to hour. Maybe you can give me a better idea, hour to hour, of what you're going to find when you go on Twitter or ESPN.com or wherever. What's your life been like during this pandemic work-wise?
Well, it's, I think personally, it's just been just trying to find any little thing about sports related to put out there. Because, people, even though there are a lot of serious stuff going on, but, people want that kind of escape, and they want to think about Clemson sports. And so, we've certainly found different outlets to write about Clemson sports. And I always think back to being at the ACC tournament, being courtside, and just watching it all go down as that day where everything just started to kind of like an avalanche, just snow coming down the hill of, this tournament was canceled, this tournament was canceled, this tournament was canceled. And Florida State's right up there in front of me, warming up. The band for Florida State's playing. The Clemson band hadn't got there yet, but the Florida State band's playing. Florida State's on the court, and they're called off the court. And minutes later, they tell us that it's been canceled. So it's from that point forward. Now we're over 3 months since the last Clemson sporting event of any type. We've had NFL draft to cover, and different recruiting stuff is going. Recruiting has really picked up and been kind of a pretty busy route so far. So I think it's going to slow down a little bit because we haven't, the dead period still continuing, and it's continuing all the way through August now. So I think it's just we're hoping that we can get this preseason football talk going, but we'll see.
Yeah, who knows? And I kind of felt a couple of weeks back, I was pretty confident, right? And this is when Texas was starting to reopen. I was pretty confident that we were going to have a football season because I thought that I knew some players. I wasn't naive enough to think, oh, nobody's going to get the coronavirus. None of these young kids are. I thought they would get it, and the vast majority would be recovered by then. And we've seen some recovery, as you and I talked about, the Texas Tech players. But we really have no idea what this means long term, and are the players going to want to play if it continues down the route it's going? It's the great unknown. It's for me every day, not having to rely on football or sports for an income, but just waking up every day. For instance, following the Major League Baseball saga over the last few weeks with my son, Parker, who loves baseball and the Astros so much. Every day I'd wake up and say, oh, they're going to play next week. Oh, no, they're not. Yes, they are. A lot of that was contractual, but a lot of it was concerns around the pandemic also, certain players opting out and not wanting to play. So I guess the unknown of the whole situation really has me back on my heels. If you had to take just a guess, just in your opinion, do you think the season starts on time, the college football season I'm talking about, or do you think there'll be a delay?
I really have no idea. I think our senior writer, David Hood, has written on our website recently that he's heard only kind of positive things about the season being played on time, just from the different movers and shakers he's heard from around the program. So, you just don't know. I think it's one of those things where if you give me a bet between everything's going to happen as scheduled, everything's going to play, or give me the field, right now I'm probably going to take the field just because it's some kind of change. Maybe not saying the season's canceled, but we have some games canceled within the season. We have some things moved around, but that's not based off anything I've necessarily heard. It's just a matter of just seeing all the news every day, just different things going on. And, it's kind of funny. Just one of the things, prepping for this podcast that I was thinking about is just how much perception changes by region. And this is a big country, and we're just, the cases in South Carolina are higher than ever. And I think it's undeniably a factor that an outbreak happening now versus now months removed from the pandemic start is definitely a factor in how it's perceived here. Like places that had an outbreak like New York City and Seattle back when it was started kicking off in the United States, they're more vigilant. They're a little more maybe pessimistic about the sports season starting, where it hit us a little bit different, and we're just not reacting to it the same way, I don't think.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. My co-host on this show typically is Casey Cregan, and he lives in New Jersey. They were hit very, very hard at the beginning, and I'm sitting here in Texas going, okay, we're not seeing the same thing he's seeing, right? He's actually lives across the street from a nursing home where people were dying. And I'm not seeing that at all in Texas where I'm at. I'm going to the movies, right? Now, granted, there was only 4 people in the theater, but we were going to the movies and acting relatively normal. Obviously, we were home more, not the same, but I mean, relatively normal. We went to the Salt Lick last weekend, or for Father's Day, I should say, and you couldn't dine inside the restaurant part, but they had picnic tables spread out over, you know, 2 acres or whatever it was, and appropriately distanced, and you could actually eat at the restaurant outside. So, but now I think that's switching around the other way, right? I think maybe they've got it more under control, and Texas is now experiencing some of that high volume. You know, one of the things we've seen recently, as early as yesterday or as late as yesterday, was some of those marketing agreements are starting to fall by the wayside. And I'm wondering about the long-term effects of this on college football. We've seen some smaller schools. I think it was Morehouse that canceled their season altogether. Furman's eliminated baseball, and some other schools and conferences have eliminated sports and different tournaments, et cetera, permanently, as I understand it. Now, I guess they could go back and change that eventually, but long term, this could have a massive effect on the whole college sports landscape, because even if things get back, quote, to normal, I mean, will it ever be like it was? Was it Under Armour, I think, pulled out of UCLA yesterday, and I think it worked out to like almost $19 million a year. The reasons weren't clear to me, but what I read was basically they weren't getting what they paid for. Advertisement on uniforms is how I read it. Could be other reasons, but long term, this could have a devastating effect on college sports.
Absolutely, yeah. And imagine just being Chip Kelly trying to sell recruits on UCLA, and you have this huge apparel company publicly dissing your university and saying, hey, you're not holding up to your end of the deal. Yeah, it's you have enough issues if you're Chip Kelly right now trying to turn around UCLA. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason, the cascading effect of potentially not having the season as scheduled. That's why they're going to do whatever they can to play, even in areas where a lot of people would strongly recommend that they don't. There's certainly a pretty heavy argument for wondering how ethical it will be to play some of these seasons in some of these areas. I think about the teams I'm fans of. Like I can't wait for Atlanta United to start its Orlando tournament for the MLS on the 11th. I'm eager to see baseball back, and I love college football, and it's my job, and I want college football. But college sports are the most tenuous of those three, because they aren't paid employees. They are one part in the student body as a whole. But in the end, I think money talks, and I think that's why we're going to see games, and even in the face of maybe some medical expertise that say there shouldn't be.
One last thing on this topic, and I'll get to some actual football questions, but I just wonder, and this is kind of a football question, I just kind of wonder, and I've talked about this on this podcast, this version of the podcast, by the way. Thanks, Brandon. This is about the 27th version of a podcast you've been on with me. So hopefully this one will stick. Will it be the same with zero or few fans in the stadium, right? When Justin Ross is not going to make a catch this year, but when Joseph Ngata makes a one-handed grab on the sidelines for a touchdown in the last minute to beat Notre Dame, and there's 2,000 people in the stands, is it going to be the same? Part of the reason we love college football, at least I'm speaking for myself, is because of the drama, right? It's the greatest reality show there is. You lose once and you may not have a chance for the rest of the season. And those big plays and the excitement of those big plays and the crowd is an integral part of it for me. I'm just wondering if it's going to be the same if it's played in an empty or nearly empty stadium.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think it will be quite the same. And it's kind of the difference between, I watch a lot of European soccer, and I think European soccer is maybe the most similar to college football in terms of environment maybe in terms of sports in the world. And it's different watching games, and they have to pipe in this crowd noise over the, from a FIFA game or something like that. And if you watch the broadcast that don't have that piped in music, it's different. It's you're hearing everything they're saying, even if it's in a different language and you can't understand it. But it'd be a little different being able to hear everything that Nick Saban could say on the sidelines. Maybe they may have to turn down the audio on the sidelines a little bit, maybe. But it'd be interesting. It's definitely going to be different. Hopefully, I think it's going to be a thing where, because of TV revenue, it's going to be having games is better with no fans is better than having no games at all.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking as you're talking, our old friend Brad Sinkiff would probably say the Miami Hurricanes might have a home field advantage this season because they're used to playing in front of nobody, right?
Right.
No doubt. All right, let's talk some football here. Over the last couple of weeks, I've put out some video clips, and I've discussed this with Casey. I'm trying to find something. How do I say this? I'm trying to find a flaw in Clemson's ointment, so to speak. I'm looking at all these things saying they're number one in FPI, or number 3, I think it was. But they're at the top of college football still. And I'm looking down there and I realize, oh, yeah, they lost 3 starting defensive backs. Isaiah Simmons, perhaps the most unique defensive player in college football. 4 offensive linemen. T. Higgins, a first-round draft pick, and Justin Ross is injured, and he's going to be out for the season. Tell me pick any of those, but what do you see as the biggest obstacle to Clemson going undefeated in the regular season? Is it Clemson?
I think that is the big overall thing is last year, when you have this kind of randomly close game against North Carolina, I don't think that game was because North Carolina was this great team. They had a good season. They had some other close losses too, but Clemson didn't play its best in that game. So they've reached a point where they are so much better than everyone else in the ACC. And they just stacked a number 1, number 2 ranked class, depending on where you look at it, on top of that dominance that they've already had. So I think it's Clemson beating Clemson. They have to stay kind of focused week to week, because the talent disparity isn't wide enough, as we saw with the North Carolina game, where if you don't play your best, you're at least your B- game, you're not going to get tripped up, because we've seen in past years they've lost at Syracuse. Lost to Pittsburgh. Like, those games have happened, and even though the overall disparity has kind of widened, those games can happen. But I think in terms of the individual weak points for this group, I don't know if there are any weak points that really stand out to me. But offensive line, when you're replacing 4 starters, that the new guys, that next man up might be good, but when you have that much turnover, you're going to have to put some young guys in some key moments. You might have an injury here or there, and it might be a true freshman there at left tackle, right tackle, at guard, at center. So I think that's going to be one of the areas to watch.
Yeah, I would think so too. And in 2015, I can remember I was on, I think it was ESPN Upstate, and they asked me they were worried about Mitch Hyde having to start as a true freshman at the last minute. And that was just one guy. And then we're replacing 4 of them. So along with the 2 wide receivers, I'm a little concerned. If you ask me, I would say yes, offensive line, obviously, but also those wide receivers. And I've gone back and watched a little bit of the film of Ladson and Ngata, and they look to be fine, and they need some seasoning, obviously, but they're not T. Higgins and they're not Justin Ross, in my opinion. So I'd be a little concerned about at least the depth at the wide receiver position, which Clemson has had for seems like forever now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think with Ngata, he was probably as hyped in a preseason camp by the coaches as, you know, kind of on a level with a Sammy Watkins or with a Travis Etienne. Etienne was another kind of fall camp star that kind of he was talked about a lot. And he had an okay season. I think he had about 250, almost 300 yards receiving maybe, but he definitely didn't make that impact that we were expecting during the season. And, you know, it's EJ Williams is kind of the hot name out of spring practice. He was there as an early enrollee. He, you know, comes from the same school as Justin Ross. You know, with Justin Ross going down, a lot of people are thinking naturally that's the freshman that might make an impact this year. You know, we'll see on that. I think he wasn't quite as highly rated as Justin Ross was out of high school, but he was certainly like a top 50 player. So, you know, but it seems like in the last few years and during this playoff era, a freshman has kind of emerged and made a play maybe outside of last season. You had Deion Kane and Hunter Renfrow in 2015. You had T. Higgins in 2017, Justin Ross in 2018. So there's definitely a pedigree there where, you know, maybe Justin Ross or EJ Williams is that guy this year.
Do you see, switching gears a little bit here, do you see any other team in the ACC? You talked about North Carolina last year, giving Clemson a game, mainly because of Clemson's lack of focus. And I think everybody agreed that was Travis Etienne's worst game of the season. But is there anyone, whether in the division, in the Atlantic Division during the season, such as Florida State or Louisville, or in the ACC as a whole in the championship game, assuming Clemson gets there, do you see anyone able to give Clemson a game, make a game or a season of it this year?
You know, I'm sure there'll be double-digit favorites probably in about every game. The potential game is probably going back to North Carolina. You know, they have Sam Howell, who's probably the second best quarterback in the ACC behind Lawrence. We've already seen North Carolina give Clemson a game. They have a really good coaching staff there at North Carolina. So if there's any team that has kind of a puncher's chance where, you know, you're in the ACC championship and, you know, it's, you know, win, get ACC championship. Yeah, I think that's a team where they're top 20 in both the ESPN FPI, they're top 20 in the SP Plus. So they're a team that definitely could catch Clemson on a bad day in Charlotte and really kind of throw things into flux. You know, this whole season's thrown into flux, but like, you know, just kind of an idea that, you know, that could be that one kind of late twist in the season. You know, North Carolina was a team that almost had that late twist in the season a few years ago against Clemson in the ACC championship game that was a little bit closer than was expected. So, yeah, I think North Carolina could be maybe that team in the ACC. I don't know in the division. I mean, you know, Louisville made some really good strides out of being, you know, no one expected anything from Louisville last year, but Scott Satterfield really did some impressive things in year one. So, you know, we'll see if they have something for the Tigers, but I think it's probably North Carolina's the best chance to beat Clemson.
I think that's a great point in that it's a one game championship. I mean, that sounds kind of obvious in college football, right? But it's a one game championship where to win the division, Florida State or Louisville is going to have to probably beat Clemson and win almost every one of their other games in the conference, and that's not likely to happen. Pre-pandemic, boy, that's a hard one to say. Pre-pandemic, I was thinking Florida State may have a chance because they're Clemson's playing Boston College, I believe, the Friday before, and that's generally a physical type game. Of course, I think that's the way it goes. And then Clemson would have to go to Florida State, and I thought that Mike Norvell would make a great improvement in his first year. Because in my mind, what Florida State's missing, a lot of it over the last few years, has been coaching, right? But when you don't have a spring and you may not have a summer, it's going to be, you know, a lot of the first time he sees these guys, maybe August for all I know, right? So that kind of puts the kibosh on that. So Mac Brown kind of has the advantage. And what you said certainly makes a lot of sense to me. especially Clemson will be coming off the South Carolina game, assuming they make the ACC championship. Interesting. Interesting. Oh, that's $11 now in my jar for that famous word. I think I almost made it through the podcast without saying it, but you got me. Brandon, I appreciate your time. What are you working on over at TigerNet that the folks can check out now?
So we're doing kind of this historical looks. David Hood's been doing a kind of behind the scenes first impressions of the Dabo Swinney era. He's gone through it's kind of a tough history because his first impressions have kind of come from the losses. He's he learned a lot about Dabo kind of behind the scenes, from what he saw, how Dabo responded to adversity. So those have been pretty interesting, and we're still doing our kind of ongoing summer series about the top 5 at each position of the ACC era, and we definitely got a good little feedback on the quarterback, because everyone has their favorite quarterbacks from the different ages. So it's been fun there, and we're coming up on virtual or on the preseason camps. We'll have coverage as hopefully everything kind of unfolds right there, and ACC kickoff will have its virtual media days July 21 to 23. So that'll be kind of interesting to see what that's like.
Cool. That sounds like a lot of fun, and we hope to have you back on before the season starts, just to talk about football, hopefully, and not have to play medical doctor or some version of a medical professional. Brandon, as always, I appreciate your time, and again, appreciate all you've done for Seldom Used Reserve over the years.
All right, thanks, Marty.
All right, Casey, that was 27 minutes and about 17 seconds of good stuff from Brandon Rink, as always. Always enjoy talking to Brandon. I mentioned it during the interview, but at one time we were both bloggers. Now, he gets paid to hang out at Death Valley on Saturday afternoons. And me and you don't. So somebody's made a good move, and a couple of us have, lagged behind a little. But anyway, something to aspire to. It's funny that I often tell him I envy him for his job, but then there are days, like after the game when you're having a cold beer in the parking lot, Brandon's up there in the press box typing up a story till 1 or 2 a.m. So, good and the bad.
It is funny that you say that, because when I was in school, especially my super senior year, I worked for ABC Sports because I didn't have as many friends in town that were coming to tailgate. A couple, but I knew afterwards I was poor super senior, and so I needed the money. So I worked for ABC Sports when they'd come to town, and I would see those guys late into the evening writing, when I was trying to steal the ABC Sports banner from across the way, and actually they would give it to me, so it wasn't technically stolen. But I would go up to the press box to have that late chili dog or to have that thing of popcorn, and you see those guys really toiling. So yes, it seems glamorous when you're reading it, and that they get to be around the team all the time, and they get to go to the Reeves Operations Center and go to the nap room. I don't know what they're doing in there, but it's not necessarily an easy job. So I envy them on one end, but it's one of those things, like maybe when you're actually doing it, it's not nearly as fun as it looks.
I think that's the case. When you see the Twitter shots from down on the field before the game, it's all great. You don't see the 1 a.m. in the morning packing up your bags, to drive back from Durham, North Carolina after a 68-14 game or whatever, and having to write a story about Clemson and Wake Forest when it's 63-7 or whatever. So
you're right. They're not flying back with the team. They're getting in their rental cars or their personal vehicles and driving right back to their house. Yeah, you're exactly right. So.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Brandon and I talked about a few things here. I wanted to run by you and get your opinion on, or your take. Much like you and I, he has no idea when the season will start, if it'll start on time, if it'll be complete, all those things you and I talked about. He is just with us. But he did mention an interesting thing. He mentioned that David Hood, the senior writer at TigerNet, he had been hearing some good things about the season starting. Now, I didn't think to ask Brandon, was this recently or last month or when exactly David said this, because it seems like all the news is bad these days. So I think you and I need to come to an agreement. We will limit our wild guesses on when the season will start, because if Brandon and David don't know, I'm pretty sure no one knows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was screaming at the phone when I was listening to it, going, "What did David say? What did David say?" I'm on TigerNet quite often trying to read the articles. I love David Hood's articles; they're fantastic, and I like that website a lot. But I was like, "What did he say? What did he hear? Who did he hear it from? What's going on? What's this positive?" Because in the same breath, I'm looking at Twitter and seeing a thing from Arizona, University of Arizona, where the president comes out and basically says that we're going to hold campus. And one of the players is like, "We're going to hold campus closed until this thing kind of goes away." And one of the players is like, "Then why are me and my teammates here?" So I needed something positive. So when I was listening to you and Brandon talking, I'm like, what is the positive? It's great that David has positive. What is it? Can I get it? Can I pay for it? What do I need to do? So, but yeah, we're not sure exactly what's going to go on. And I've been playing Dr. Beef here the first 3 weeks, and I've been doom and gloom, which is totally against my personality, but I just need some positive, man. I need something positive. The fact that this thing's moving across the country, it's moving to the south. It's not good.
Well, maybe it's just hope, because that's what I have. I've kind of backtracked a little bit too, and I'm Mr. Positive also. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but I've had a few setbacks over the last week, just thinking that the season will be a start on time and be full and complete, because it's going to be really weird if there's 12 games for some team and 5 for others and 3. I think I saw an article on ESPN that could be like, what was it, 1943, I guess, in the middle of World War II. They had all kinds of Iowa pre-flight was ranked number 2. And, some teams played 3 games, some played none, some played a full season. So I don't know. I think we ought to quarantine the COVID talk for maybe a week or 2 until we have some resolution. Hey, but now to get into the football talk that Brandon and I actually talked about, which was really, really cool to talk football. He sees Clemson's biggest opponent in 2020 as being Clemson, right? He doesn't think there's anyone on their schedule. We didn't talk specifically about Notre Dame, but he pointed to North Carolina as, he talked about last year's North Carolina game and how that really wasn't North Carolina playing great or being competitive with Clemson on a week-to-week basis. It's just that week Clemson had a down game, and we know Travis Etienne said it was his worst game of the season. So really he sees Clemson's biggest competition as Clemson, which I would tend to agree with. How about you?
I do too, and that's been so cliche over the last few years that we've been hearing it. Dabo says it. It sounds like coach speak a lot of the time, but I think it's true. And I know what we talked about last week, where there is some attrition at the offensive line and the wide receiver. I know we're going to get into that in a little bit. I just think that they just replace great with good, and a lot of teams can't do that necessarily. So the teams that are losing a bunch, or even like a Louisville pops to my mind when you guys were talking about that a little bit. Malik Cunningham, the quarterback. I know I said I messed up last week and called him somebody else, but Puma Pass, he's gone. I'm sorry, I messed that up. I was talking about Malik Cunningham, but he's going to take a step up in Scott Satterfield's offense, and I'm a little worried about them. But we talked way back before we started this about how I always look at the other teams as good and better, and so I'm a little worried. Now, teams like Wake, I'm not worried about, especially with what they lost Jamie Newman, and I think both the wide receivers are back, but I'm still not worried about who's going to them. I'm not worried about Syracuse. I'm really not, which is weird because they kind of give us fits. A little worried about BC up there on Friday, but with all that being said, I won't go into every team. I will say Clemson beating Clemson is what's going to happen, because I think the wide receivers, whether it's Ladson, whether it's EJ Williams, as Brandon and you mentioned in your talk, a true freshman, or whether it's Ngata, Amari Rogers is set to have a breakout year too. So I'm not necessarily worried about the wide receivers. I think I'm leaning more towards, I think the way you're going to go, we'll talk about it in a little bit, about the offensive line. I'm scared of that a little bit. I know everybody, Jackson Carman's back at left tackle. I think he's going to be a star on the offensive line, but we need some help on the interior, I think, and the right tackle side. So we're not sure exactly what we're going to do there. So to answer your question short-windedly, I guess I should say, I think you guys were exactly right that it is Clemson beating Clemson in this situation. I am a little worried about Louisville because of Malik Cunningham, and that running back name escapes me right now, but I'm not sure about their defense. So maybe it's a Lamar Jackson-esque kind of Louisville offense where they're going to win games 49-42, but I don't know against Brent Venables' defense if they're going to score 49. Maybe they score 28 and get outscored 56-28. So I kind of talked myself into saying it's still Clemson versus Clemson.
Hey, don't beat yourself up over missing a name. If we did that, we'd be here all day.
I'm usually good, though. I'm usually good.
Well, I'm not. So
I messed up Hendon Hooker. I messed them all up last week. So I'll do some research. I was put on the spot a little bit, you know.
No worries. You hit the nail on the head. I wanted to talk next about the most concerning, what you see is the most concerning part of all the losses Clemson had, or the major ones. Let's talk about 3 starting defensive backs, Isaiah Simmons, 4 starters on the offensive line, and of course T. Higgins, and the injury to Justin Ross. I am going to go a different way here, and I'll explain why. I'm going to go with the wide receivers being my biggest concern. And the reason is, if you think about it, over the last 5, 6, 7 years since Clemson's become an elite team, they haven't had an elite offensive line. They've had some very good offensive lines, some good offensive lines, and sometimes maybe, just enough to get by. But that's not what makes Clemson Clemson, right? What makes Clemson Clemson? Wide receivers, tons of them, 6 off one team in the NFL, I think, and top flight, top end wide receivers, experience coming back all over the place. Look around the wide receiver core this year, and you don't see that. To me, what makes Clemson Clemson is wide receivers and a quarterback, of course. But the wide receivers are more important to this offense because they can scheme around some of the shortcomings on the offensive line. You're not going to be able to scheme around as much with the wide receivers. I'm not saying Ngata's not going to be good, or Frank Latson, or even E.J. Williams, who Brandon mentioned. But to me, there's not a proven guy there besides Amari Rodgers. And as we know, he hasn't proven to be the type of wide receiver that Clemson lost, the Justin Ross or T. Higgins, or he's more along the Renfro kind of wide receiver, right? The possession type you like to think of. What's your take on that?
That did surprise me that you were going that way. But then I looked up the projected Clemson depth chart right now. And I don't know if you saw me while you were talking, but my eyebrows raised almost to this is a really high ceiling in here. And my eyebrows, I believe, went to them and then some. But the backup right now, on the current roster, the way that it sits right now, that's with the enrollees, the number 2, the backup to the number 2 receiver, which is that slot receiver, that Amari Rodgers behind Amari Rodgers, is right. Will Sweeney. So I think what you said is completely – that's the coach's kid who gets in a lot. They run plays to him. They run the end arounds. He's been involved, but usually in the third quarter or the fourth quarter, and, with Chase Bryce or with Famachan or whoever may be in court, he's not usually in with Trevor.
Right.
And so that just raised my eyebrows significantly. That's our backup at the 2. Nothing against the kid. The kid works hard. He can run hard. He's returned kicks, but he's not necessarily a Amari Rodgers or a Justin Ross or.
Well, two things. Summer depth chart, right? So very well, and always changes. I shouldn't say very well changes. It always changes. But number 2, as you pointed out, he's not a dynamic player. He is what he is, and he's good at that, and he's a great team player. but he's not a dynamic player in the mold of, I was talking about T. Higgins, Justin Ross, or even Ngata and Latson to that. You know, and Ngata and Latson may develop over the summer, but it's a weird environment to develop in, right? How are you going to develop, you know, with no summer workouts or limited summer workouts? It's just one of those things that I think, you know, maybe they have to rely on Travis Etienne. And Lord knows if there's any team that, you know, has to rely on a running back, Clemson's got a good one, a good couple, 2, 3, 4. So maybe it works out in the end, but maybe it's a different kind of team that doesn't rely as much on the wide receivers.
Here's a question for you while we're talking about receivers or, you know, people catching the football. Maybe, do you think maybe they start using the tight end again the way that they did back in 2015 with Jordan Leggett, now that they have a Braden Galloway back, a kid that missed almost all the last season? I thought he was going to get more run in the playoff. I mean, he made a couple catches, but I thought he was going to be used more. He wasn't. But he is a pass-catching tight end in the ilk of a Jordan Leggett who went on to the Jets for a couple of years. I think he's with the Buccaneers now.
I would certainly think that would be part of the calculus. And Braden Galloway running down the middle and catching a pass is a beautiful thing, as we saw in the national championship game. I was tempted to put that on the highlights or the clips that I send out daily. But the problem is when I put a clip out there that involves a loss, I always get comments about those clips, you know, like it wasn't a great play, or, you know, it doesn't matter. It's still a good play. It's still an athletic play. But Braden Galloway catching passes and running in the open field is a beautiful thing. And I hope to see it 47 to 52 times next year, not to be exact. But those are my main takeaways from Brandon and I's discussion. And, you know, it's not even a disagreement on the offensive line versus wide receivers. It's just an opinion. And it's just my opinion that they're going to miss those wide receivers. When you think about Clemson, you think about wide receivers more than you think about offensive linemen. They've had some very good offensive linemen, but, you know, none that I would say were I wouldn't even say outstanding. They've had some outstanding offensive linemen at time, none that were elite as a group across the entire offensive line. Casey, that's really all I had for tonight. I know you are hanging out with your family a lot this week, so I wanted to keep it short for you. And again, Brandon, if you're listening, I appreciate you stepping in for Casey. As I said, we always planned on having you as our first guest. We didn't quite plan on it this way, but, you know, we didn't plan on a pandemic either. So
I can't wait to get a chance to talk to him too, because I want to pick his brain and ask him some more questions and get deep and find out who David Hood's talking to. You know, I want to know.
Who's got the good news? All right, Casey, we'll keep it short. I appreciate your time. Have a good time hanging out with your family. I only got one thing left for you to do, and you know what it is.
Producer Amy, how'd we do tonight?
I think that sounds pretty good.